Hello, everybody. My name is Francisco Lucia, and my colleague Damian Wilkins and I, we are doing the presentation on trauma in children, and it's the link between the type of attachment and childhood trauma. All right. Introduction to attachment and trauma. Why attachment matters? Early attachments, early childhood. It is defined by our attachment given to caregivers and parents. And they shape the emotional development that child will have later in life. The two examples we'll be using would be secure attachment and insecure attachment. Secure attachment builds resilience, while insecure attachment is associated with emotional challenges like confusion or fear. And the role of childhood trauma has said here is experiences like abuse and neglect, both the physical and the emotional side, and it's that series and very triggering sexual can interfere on the happy attachment, which will lead to the other attachments as ambivalence, avoidance, or secure. And it's essential to understand the psychological intervention. The study done by Attila and Feroz Khan from Turkey is to investigate how childhood trauma predicts attachment styles. The hypothesis is greater childhood trauma will be associated with insecure attachment styles like ambivalent, avoidant, insecure, or disorganized attachments, if that's the name. And the important is that it provides research-based evidence in supporting the theory on attachment development from childhood to adulthood. Research methodology. The sample is from 911 university students, 492 females and 419 males from Nikola City University from Turkey. The data is collected from two questionnaires: childhood trauma from assessing maltreatment and relationships scaling that identifies attachment styles. The analysis uses the Pearson correlation analysis. Sure. Picture of it. But it goes from emotional abuse to physical abuse, neglect, and sexual neglect, and emotional neglect to the four styles. That's how it goes. So, emotional abuse, physical abuse and neglect, and sexual neglect. And it goes to emotional neglect, and then it goes to the four styles. The correlation between trauma and attachment. This correlation between is twofold. Now, being exposed to young children will make them very insecure, attached to their partners later in life, or want to be very mistrustful to strangers. And those are exposed to trauma and try to avoid it, leading to be more avoidant and fear. Predictive role of trauma on attachment. One of the predictions of trauma and attachment is the worse trauma is for the participants, the worse attachment would be from their early childhoods to adulthood. This is that historically speaking, caregivers were not the best as they can be abusive, neglectful, or unpredictable well, that would traumatize the children. But back then it was seen as a rite of passage, though some of the children that became potentially world leaders, those would have problems ones from their childhood that affected their future. And this is also so how now in recently in terms of the psychology, researchers discovered that children have feelings of attachment with their parent are more emotionally stable and more independent and more comfortable to be independent. How this connects to attachment theory. The article talks how trauma from childhood and its attachments to both styles of the attachment theories. So little to no trauma would lead to secure. Some trauma would lead to ambivalence. Too much would be avoidant, and straight up trauma would be too insecure. How childhood goes from and yeah, child goes to turn the attachment style and how that will affect the children because it just happens to them naturally to that they observe it and they just it's to us that to get less punished they use the other styles to adapt to their childhood. And it goes along with how the trauma also affects it too. The analysis of the study is that it was a very good large sample of 911 was so good size, and the SEM provides a robust analysis of predictive relationships from the attachment styles and the childhood trauma. But there are limitations. This is self-reporting. The grades 111 students with questions, so there might be biases with that, as well as the fact that this is university students, which is not the greater general public, so limited generalization. Alternative approaches and future directions. There is a range of studies that can be done and learn from this. This attachment theory develops over time, so there will be casual inferences, as well as future research can focus on how attachment may can either be easy or more complicated and difficult for trust compatibility from relationships later in life with strangers and potential and friends and potential lovers. Another point for researchers that we need to focus on would be find more therapeutic ways to help people that are victims from caregivers and navigating insecure attachments. The practical implications from this article is that therapeutic intervention is a must. Trauma-informed therapy can help individuals develop more secure attachment patterns. And parenting and education programs must still be a thing and be supported to educate caregivers and future parents to be more responsive on caregiving to prevent any insecure attachments with clinical and counseling being as important as early trauma screening to kids or later in life as adults to help create interventions in those moments so they are not constantly being insecure later. In conclusion, the effects of trauma in early childhood attachment is very apparent that is affected even the participants into childhood. The participants are university students, and the fact that they even admit that their childhood traumatized them shows a lot. Counselors may need to help assist these evaluations until parents overcome their childhood trauma and will take a lot of strength and comfort for them. They should not be ashamed for being adults and having childhood trauma. As well as counseling should look for more psychoeducational and helpful factors to help future victims as well to help prevent then future victims from institute here and bad parenting. This is the references to the article. And these are the questions. How childhood trauma affects attachment to the children. How long does trauma affect into childhood? And what are the questions good enough and not vague for the participants? That is all. Thank you.